Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and especially to our night crew for tonight. It is about 8:30 Pacific time, 11:30 p.m. Eastern time, and this is Behind the Wall to conclude what has been a tremendous weekend of racing in all three of NASCAR's divisions, as well as the Indy 500, the Monaco Grand Prix earlier this week. We will touch on many of the storylines here tonight. Again, I'm sure there's plenty of people that are watching this tape delayed here the next day. Certainly can't blame you there. But I definitely wanted to make sure to wait till after the Xfinity race in order to discuss the weekend's events. And what an Xfinity race it was, concluding with Justin Allgaier pulling off a fuel mileage victory at Charlotte. His first this season for JR Motorsports, punching his ticket into the playoffs this year. A driver that's always finding his way in and around the top four in the playoffs here. Has another chance at it this season. So we'll see how things shake out there. Had more than enough fuel in order to do burnouts at the end of the race. A bit of it seems like it's been forever since we've had such a good fuel mileage battle at the end of one of these races here. Certainly the stage racing does not really lend itself to that, even with the third stage being as long as it is. But that was the case this time around. The margin of victory, 7.829 seconds between Justin Allgaier and John Hunter Nemechek. John Hunter certainly going even more into conservation mode there, but still being 3 seconds ahead of Cole Custer. Austin Hill was the one lying in wait there in case everybody ran out of gas there in the fourth spot. Gained from about 25 seconds back at the lead to 16.3 seconds at the finish. However, he'll have to settle for a fourth place run. Ty Gibbs, the first one of the drivers that pitted in the closing stages there to come back in that case, coming back with a fifth place finish. Certainly after the disappointment of his run in the 600 for how well that he had performed in that race. A nice way to send things off there. Right behind them, the last two cars on the lead lap will be your Jordan Anderson Racing teammates, Parker Retzlaff and Jeb Burton. Fine runs for the both of them there. Looked like maybe Retzlaff or Burton were in position to maybe pull off an even bigger upset with the way this race was playing out there. Unfortunately not meant to be, but fortunately, another great top 10 performance for both those teams there. That's certainly some great exposure for them. How about Carson Hocevar? Running a great race again for the Xfinity Series effort. Yes, he got a real strong engine there in that Spire Motorsports entry, but making the most out of it. Very nearly wrecked it on the back straightaway there towards the end of it. And still able to get a nice 8th place finish off of that. Brandon Jones and Sammy Smith round out your top 10 there at the conclusion of 200 laps. Your last place finisher in this one. This turned out to be a kind of a tale of two stories here for your last place battle there. At the beginning, when the race started earlier this morning at 11 a.m. Eastern time, 8 a.m. Pacific, we had the first 49 laps of it completed and saw most of our battles for last place through that event. Parker Kligerman has ultimately turned out to be your last place finisher, finishing 56 laps down under power, but he was not a factor until his car actually shut off with a fuel pump issue when the race resumed this evening. Prior to that, you actually had a pretty good exchange for position there. Natalie Decker took the last spot from Jeffrey Earnhardt at the very beginning of the race. Garrett Smithley and Stephen Parsons both had issues with their engine. Both of them losing a lap before their respective cautions, both of them getting their lap back. Parsons ultimately losing his lap again before the race actually restarted earlier this evening. But Garrett Smithley, Natalie Decker, all of them kind of trading the spots there, staying very competitive there. Brett Moffitt looked like he was going to be a challenger for last place when he bounced off the outside wall, but a great job by the AM Racing effort there to get the number 25 car up there and get a decent finish out there. The 29th spot, not exactly what they wanted, certainly, for one of the best mid-pack teams out there, the AM Racing effort. But regardless, I think, given how serious the damage was, it looked like, I thought for sure they were going to end up taking over the last spot, but that car seemed pretty durable there at the end of the day there. But Parker Kligerman's story, after getting the last place run at Dover earlier this year, this became the saga of the fuel pump and the fuel pump cord or belt that they were looking for at the same time there. The cord was frayed at one end at some point, and the team just had a terrible time trying to find the replacement. Apparently they had some plastic bins in the hauler. They couldn't find the replacement pump in there. Apparently tried to replace the cable. I don't know what exactly they ultimately ended up doing. This is kind of one of the challenges there of doing this remotely. But ultimately, they got him back out there with about 40 or 50 laps to go. Didn't gain any other spots there as a result of it. He basically was about just kind of a net gain. If somebody dropped out right at the moment he came back on track, that's pretty much what would need to happen unless we went into overtime. And certainly with the fuel mileage finish, that was not in the cards here for that one. But Kligerman, your last place finisher there, the number 48 car, finishing in this spot, his second last place run of the year. And we're already kind of seeing a bit more variety in terms of which drivers are finishing last this season. Both the Truck Series and Xfinity Series, for a time, had different last place finishers in each race, but now we're reaching that kind of point of the season going into the early summer months where that could change up, and we perhaps see some favorites for the last car battle. Is Kligerman going to be the one I give a certificate to in November? We will find out, but there's going to be a lot more racing to go to figure all of that out in the meantime. Looking at some other good runs through here, Kyle Sieg in an 11th place finish there. Tremendous for him, especially for one of the drivers. Especially for one of the drivers that had incurred a pre-race penalty there to drop him back to the back of the pack, what feels like about 15 hours ago here, with number 28 car dropping to the back of the field there. But finishing the 11th spot, great job for him. We think back to Talladega, and he was one of the drivers that was really trying to capitalize on a lot of those big accidents that were happening at the end. Unfortunately, gets involved in one of them and dropping out in that deal. But a great effort for him, and it's certainly good to see here at the exact same time there. So an 11th place run for him. That's certainly one of the standouts there, along with Parker Retzlaff, Jeb Burton, as well as Carson Hocevar, as mentioned earlier there. Other drivers back in the order. Riley Herbst had some pretty solid contact with the outside wall, dropped him back. I didn't realize until the Darlington article how really good he's been performing this year. Still hasn't scored his first win, but was pretty consistent through the first portion of the season. Unfortunately, he's now had a couple of kind of rough runs here. Hopefully things turn around for them in Portland, which will be the next Xfinity race here this next week as we start a back-to-back round of road courses, at least for the Xfinity Series side. For Cup and trucks, things are going to be a bit different going through Gateway this week. We'll talk about that here along the way, too. Sheldon Creed had an incident on pit road. That dropped him back to the 28th spot there to finish in the Xfinity race. Further back, Jeffrey Earnhardt started last in the grid there, but came back to finish in the 21st spot right behind Kyle Weatherman there, driving for the Mario Gosselin effort. Just great that they got all the races in. I mean, I think tremendous to get 900 miles of racing in today between the Allsco 300 here for the Xfinity Series, as well as, of course, the Coca-Cola 600 and the Memorial Day Classic, literally on Memorial Day this time around for that. Alrighty. So yes, absolutely tremendous here to kind of check out what kind of action we had from the Xfinity Series. Again, just glad that they got it in. I think that was tremendous. I think one thing that has to be said, again, a concerted effort between NASCAR, determined to try to get these races in today. At one point they were really trying to get that Xfinity race going, even when rain was coming down, and clearly they couldn't do it at that point. Just making the best of a bad situation. I mean, unfortunately, even with the developments in rain tires that NASCAR has, this was definitely the most challenging situation and probably their worst case scenario. 600-mile race, you got your longest race of the season. You want to build off the hype of the Indy 500 and kind of feature it in its own right. As Mike Joy explained during the broadcast today, that goes back to the very origins of the event. And it's unfortunate when you have this happen. You're not really going to move this date because it's so intrinsically tied to Memorial Day weekend and honoring the fallen members of the armed services that have given their life for this country. And there's so many of those profound ceremonies that you see in the Indy 500. Unfortunately, some of that had to get kind of curtailed here with the 600 just to fit that into the event. You never want that to happen, but weather is still the unpredictable element here, and as many times we're going to run bank tracks and non-road courses, that's going to be a potential problem at any of these places, and I don't see that changing in the foreseeable future. But Kudos to NASCAR for working with the schedule to try to get them in. Kudos to Charlotte for making sure anybody who had a ticket for either event was still able to get in there, which is a huge gamble since the 600 was sold out. At least the grandstands were coming into this weekend. I think that could have been a real problem, but obviously you're going to have situations where you got people that aren't able to stay the extra night or have to travel back. I always hate those situations there because, I mean, I know how expensive these trips can be, especially if you're coming from out of the region there, and so that's going to be a real problem. But really, I think it was great that they got both of them in, and certainly memorable races in both respects there, too. You got Justin Allgaier breaking through and getting his first Xfinity win of the season. You got Ryan Blaney in the Cup Series race to break through with his. We haven't talked about that yet, but we'll certainly get to that here as well in the discussion today. So I think, again, much like with Wilkesboro last week, a lot of positives to glean from these here. Again, and I think it was actually, probably for the best they didn't try to force the drivers to do the drivers-only broadcast after all the delays here. Certainly they were putting in enough hours for the rain delay coverage on Saturday. I'm not a big fan of rain delay coverage in general, even during the ESPN days. I never really watched it. I wanted to watch this for the racing, but I know that people were having a lot of fun with it. Certainly Carson Hocevar and Austin Cindric were big parts of that. Really cool to see. I think especially in the Xfinity Series, I think it had a real positive effect because you got to really see a lot of these drivers and show their personalities and hear from guys like Hocevar and Raja Caruth and Joe Graf. Parker Retzlaff was part of that too. That was cool. That was good to see. And hopefully people realize that it shouldn't take a rain delay to really have that. We should be able to have these drivers kind of laid back a bit and kind of showing a bit more of their personality. NASCAR, of course, is in the midst of having to face this now because of what happened with Denny Hamlin with the podcast, with drivers that have admitted that they've caused wrecks or just allowed wrecks to happen, and how seriously they've treated those, much more so than they've really needed to, than it's been necessary, and because we haven't been able to have these drivers speak out and show their personalities. And so the conclusion then becomes what personality these drivers have. Again, hopefully they kind of come to a right consensus. You don't want people wrecking each other left and right and all that, but at the same time, you don't want people afraid to express themselves either, because I think that's part of what made the golden age of the sport so good, is you had a lot of veteran drivers that had gained a lot of respect, and they had really distinctive personalities they developed, and they were allowed to. And Dale Earnhardt was central to that. It's the concept of that had existed well before Dale Earnhardt, and it should exist after him too. So hopefully that's something that we get closer to realizing here at the same time. Let's see here. Oh, goodness, we got 41 people in here. That's way more than I thought we got. I thought we had maybe 10 people in here tonight. So I do appreciate you guys tuning in here. We'll keep, of course, discussing the action from this. So, Xfinity Series race. I love the fuel mileage event. Broadcast I think was solid. I'm not a big Adam Alexander fan, but I didn't find him patently offensive tonight. I thought that was fine, so that was okay. Moving on to the Coca-Cola 600 here. Congratulations to Ryan Blaney pulling off the win earlier this evening here. I know that this is a driver that has had so many naysayers coming out and saying, there's wasted potential, as if his career is already done, as if we've seen already what this guy can accomplish. Having a number of races where he's led more than 100 laps and not pulled off the victory. This being his first, after leading 163 laps, that he's pulled off the actual win there. Blaney is as consistently, even last year when he was off kilter there and not scoring a win, he and Truex were in that same group, being like the best drivers that didn't win a race that season, even as competitive as that season was. Very easily could have pulled off a couple victories last year, and same thing this season. I think now, pulling off that win, I know Martin Truex kind of dismissed this when his streak ended earlier this year at Dover, even though on top of that he won the Clash earlier this year. But we saw really how much that meant to Blaney, and I'm sure it meant the same to Truex when he broke through at the same time there. Truex, I think, just kind of downplays a lot of things in his in all that. So, but Blaney, a very popular victory. It was great to hear everybody chanting for him there, which was a very big crowd. It seemed like a lot of them stayed over for the Xfinity race afterwards, but still seemed like we had a very good crowd for the Cup race. And God bless them, because, that was very much reminiscent of what we had at Fontana earlier this year with our trackside coverage this spring. Thankfully, they didn't have any snow to deal with, but my goodness, the most persistent and obnoxious rain that we've certainly seen on a race weekend, certainly since Texas in 2020. And very nearly had a scenario very much like that in the Xfinity race today, where John Hunter Nemechek slipped up into the wall there when the track was damp, like Kevin Harvick's situation in 2020 there. Thankfully, John Hunter was still able to contend for the win the rest of the night here, but we didn't have that situation there develop here on the Cup Series side. But Ryan Blaney, your winner. William Byron in the second spot, seemed to have easily the best car through the early and middle stages of that event, but has to settle for a second spot, although he was gaining very quickly on that number 12 at the end. Truex in third, and a wonderful day for 2311 Racing for both Bubba Wallace and Tyler Reddick. Both of them having a bit of some bumping and banging out there at one point or another. Tyler Reddick driving full tilt through the grass after losing control, but maintaining control enough to drive back onto the surface there and have a decent finish outside of that. And Bubba Wallace apparently in a bit of a scuffle there with Eric Almirola. And no love lost between these two drivers, apparently. Not exactly the kind of argument I think anybody would anticipate. Almirola particular on this side here. But apparently gestures were made and expressions were not received well there from the footage that we saw from the grandstands there. But Almirola and Bubba Wallace, again, I'm not exactly sure what more was going on there between that, but I suppose we'll hear more about that in these next couple of races, I suppose. Again, and I think this kind of builds on what we saw from, again, I always feel like I have to tread lightly with any discussion of Bubba Wallace. Of course, I was there at Las Vegas last year when he had the wreck with Kyle Larson. We, of course, have another wreck that we have to talk about here from this very race that involved very different parties here that we'll certainly talk about here on the show tonight. A win and wear with, again, going on the same thing about drivers showing personality. And, these guys are all competing for wins. You don't expect them to all be friends all the time. You don't expect them to play nice all the time. It shouldn't be like that. You'd like to think that they respect each other as competitors. I think that's important. But, again, showing personality and being aggressive and all that, I think we should have that. I mean, again, that's why I think the Ross Chastain thing has been kind of blown up that way, and Bubba Wallace has been in a similar vein there. There's different reasons for both of them being in that position here. I do think there's a little bit of a time and a place with things. I think with Bubba Wallace's situation with the middle finger at the broadcast there, and I know that there's drivers that flip each other off, and we see that all the time, and it's not a big deal. There is a little bit of a difference there when it's during a broadcast, and you're seeing it just right on camera, and it's like, wait a minute, are you flipping off the camera? What's going on here? Apparently in that case there was about somebody behind him, and he was playing around with them. That's fine, at the end of the day, but I don't blame NASCAR for kind of at least kind of looking at that a little bit more and being like, well, you probably shouldn't do it in that sense. But I don't think NASCAR would have a problem if, somebody's going to be flipping off another driver like he did with Eric Almirola, apparently in this case, from what we're hearing with the story. I don't think that's a big deal at all. I mean, Josh Berry in the double bird, the famous double bird in IndyCar. I know a different series, of course, but Will Power's situation there. I think people can delineate the two situations there. And no, it isn't. I don't believe it's because it was Bubba Wallace. If it was Denny Hamlin doing that and flipping off the camera, I'd have the same reaction, be like, what the hell was that about? So I don't believe it's as easy as it's just Bubba because it's this. I do think it's something different in that sense there. So I do think there's a time and a place for it, but I don't think at the same time, do I think that, that the Wilkesboro situation, did I think that should have been like a massive penalty or something like that? No, I don't think so. I think NASCAR handled that one as well as they should have. Just say, well, it's unprofessional, because their interview should be just doing the interview. Like, I know that the drivers, I'm sure, don't like doing it, and I'm sure they get sick of being asked the same questions all the time. I don't blame them on that. I'm sure if the roles were reversed, I would be sick of it. Just don't do it there. If you want to flip off another driver and get in a big fight with them and all that, I don't think NASCAR is going to step in the way of that. And I think that that's kind of a different there. So I know I didn't really talk about that in the Wilkesboro thing. I think that was developing when we were doing the show there, but that's kind of my 2 cents on that. So we have to kind of go transition from that to the other accident that was very big in this one here, and no doubt everybody's going to be talking about all week, and no doubt Denny Hamlin is going to be very much talking about on his podcast this week, and that is yet another scuffle between him and Chase Elliott. Suddenly we're back to, 2017 all over again here? Boy, oh boy, I'm sure there's some rational discussions that are already taking place on social media about this. Denny Hamlin posting the throttle and steering trace from everything here. And, I mean, my goodness, it's, I guess, it's just going to be another thing. I mean, Chase Elliott is not going to say that he wrecked Denny Hamlin intentionally. Of course, we've seen what's happened with Denny, with William Byron, with other drivers in that situation there. And I think there is enough question. And really, watch it. When I saw the wreck first, it really looked to me like Brad Keselowski was really close behind them and kind of triggered this accident between them. And it really wasn't either of their faults. And maybe neither of them were really watching that. But if Denny Hamlin's pulling up throttle traces and everything, he probably saw the replay plenty of times. I don't know. It's seeing the damage that was on Chase Elliott's car, and a lot of that damage probably was after the contact with Denny Hamlin had bounced him off the wall. I mean, there was definitely some damage to the right side of the car. How much of that happened actually before the wreck? It's a little hard to tell from some of the camera angles there. If the right front suspension was damaged and he's trying to jerk the wheel to the left through that quad oval there and the steering's just not responding, you could have a situation just like that. The problem is it does look like after the contact between Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott, where Chase bounces off the outside wall, suffers X amount of damage to his car, there is a moment of pause, and then it seems like he kind of turns left into Hamlin and kind of spins him around. And I don't blame Hamlin for being upset one way or the other. I mean, it was a very hard hit, certainly the hardest hit that we saw in that race for what played out there. But I think the Keselowski element needs to be kind of looked at a bit more. Keselowski himself didn't seem sure if, what was happening one way or the other, and probably wasn't even aware, if he had any role in the accident there. I'm glad that Fox, for once, added a bit more context to this and kind of wound things back a little bit to try to figure out what was happening there with the with Hamlin and Chase. But going into Gateway, where we saw the latest significant chapter, one of the first big chapters of the Denny Hamlin-Ross Chastain rivalry, I am sure that all the montages we're going to see this week of all these clips trying to hype everybody up for Gateway this week, it's going to be Ross Chastain and Hamlin, it's going to be Hamlin and Chase, it's going to be Hamlin versus the world. And whether that's right or not, that's the way that race is going to be marketed. And hey, we're going to have Kenny Wallace in the booth, which I think is going to be hilarious. I can't wait for it. It's too bad they are going to have Michael Waltrip in there for the next part of it. I think they could probably do with a little less of that if they just had Kenny in there for the whole thing, and maybe Kenny in one part and Rusty for another part for a St. Louis race. I think that would be cool. I know Mikey's from the Midwest too, but I think that would have been I would think that would have been even better. Or have Rusty and Kenny in there for the whole race. What the heck? I mean, Fox has had things loosened up that much, but I'm happy to have Kenny in there in general. I think that it was sad that they weren't able to do the race day thing this weekend at the 600. Apparently that was one of the many events that was canceled in the lead up to the race because of the rain. Again, I hate it for a lot of the fans that were at the track there. I know that sucks when, rain kind of screws with the schedule. But again, kudos to those who stayed and were able to enjoy it. Hopefully they got, hopefully they at least get a nice card or something from the folks over at the track there for sticking it out there, because I think that was well above and beyond. But yeah, I think that's where we're going to be heading here with Gateway. It's going to be the Denny Hamlin montage, and Fox is going to be very quick to pick up on that too, going into this. And we're going to find out. But whether or not this race is going to have the same physicality that we saw between Chastain and Hamlin last year, or something of that nature, I guess we're going to certainly find out. One thing I was kind of waiting to come to blows, I don't know if it actually did, was Ricky Stenhouse and Kyle Busch at the end of this 600 here. Stenhouse having another of his many good runs he's had since Daytona. The 47 team, JTG, really showing their strength this year. Then getting pounded, kind of shouldered into the wall there by Kyle Busch. And then Stenhouse trying to come back and trying to spin Kyle Busch out. And Kyle doing another amazing job keeping his car straight. I fully expected something to be happening from that. I don't know if something else has since I turned the TV off here, but I didn't hear anything on that situation. But I think that's another one to certainly look at there too. But results here showing Kyle Busch in the 6th spot and Ricky Stenhouse in 7th. Chris Buescher in 8th, Austin Dillon 9th, and Zane Smith, 1 week removed from his Cup debut at Gateway when he drove in relief of Chris Buescher under the COVID regulations at the time. Zane Smith gets his first career top 10 and only his 6th Cup start. A tremendous effort for him. Congratulations to him on that. He's really making the most out of these limited runs in the 38 car. Unfortunately, Todd Gilliland not having a great day in the number 51 car there. Apparently the car's transmission locked up when he was getting the push. Ends up dropping him into the bottom 5 there after a spin down the back straightaway. Chase Elliott and Danny Hamlin in the bottom 5 as well. And then, of course, in the bottom 5, we have to transition to the other big story, which was, of course, the unusually competitive last place battle between the entirety of the Legacy Motor Club. So the early laps of this race here, Todd Gilliland seemed like he was really struggling. You got Ty Dillon back there as well. Other drivers having problems. Chase Briscoe seemed like he was going to be having a lot of situations there with him. But all of a sudden, Jimmie Johnson has that spin down the back straightaway. He clears the crash clock, keeps going, even though he bounced the left front off the outside wall. We've seen how fragile these cars have been. We've seen how much Jimmie Johnson has kind of struggled to adjust to this car. And of course, the couple of years it's been since he's run full-time in Cup, just having these part-time efforts. You could argue in these last couple wrecks that both of these were not of his doing. Being involved in a massive pileup at Daytona is certainly nothing new, even in his previous career. And then going to Circuit of the Americas and having a wreck on the first lap with Ty Dillon that kept him basically one corner from completing the first lap of the race. He now comes in, the number 84 car is a lone open entry in here, spins out about, 50, 60 laps into the race, damages his car, clears the crash clock, comes back out, and after he clears the clock, he's going to go back into the garage area. But moments later, after he goes back in the garage to get other repairs and try to finish the race, both of his teammates, both Noah Gragson and Eric Jones, Jones was actually having a very good run in the early stages of this event here. Both of them, apparently, according to reports from the team, both teams ran over debris and both of them punctured the radiator and both of them were leaking water, which obviously they couldn't do. Same thing, it took out Bob Schacht in the 1992 Daytona 500 and so forth. Luckily, in both their cases, they were able to get new either the radiators fixed or replaced. But it turns out it took both those teams several laps to do so. So much so that they were still attempting repairs during the last rain delay of the night. The teams had to stop working, of course, which drug the repairs even longer. Yet Jones and Gragson go back out there, but apparently Gragson's engine was more damaged because he was listed out with engine failure. Jones ended up finishing the race under power. Looking at him in the race results here, he finishes in the 32nd spot, still finishing, looks like 59 laps down there. The number 43 car, the Air Force Thunderbird scheme, and of course wearing this shirt did not offer him much luck there, but he was not the last place finisher. Kind of similar to what I was wearing on the Indy 500 day. I wore a Stephen Wilson shirt that just happened to come in before the weekend. I didn't think it was going to, but once it did, I was like, well, I got to wear this, pulling for the number 24 team, and well, it didn't help on that side either, so I guess that's just going to be the norm for me. I don't know why it shouldn't surprise me, but I guess that's just kind of the situation there on that end. But Jimmie Johnson, your last place finisher, the second straight Coca-Cola 600 he's finished last in. We did have a call on Cup Series inspection during the Xfinity race that has now locked up that last place run for Jimmie Johnson, the first for the number 84 since Red Bull Racing was in existence. AJ Allmendinger finishing last at Richmond in the September of 2008, which was also a rain-delayed race and was also a race that Jimmie Johnson won. As the last time that's happened, I have no clue. I don't keep track of those stats. After all this weekend, I'm not even going to begin to try to figure that out. I'm going to assume that it's very rare. I think that's the case, especially with drivers having the length of the careers that they have now. But Jimmie Johnson, being your last place finisher there. First time for the 84, finishing last in the 600 since 1964, with Pete Stewart driving a Pontiac there. So definitely a throwback in a couple respects. And again, we did have a call on the inspection. Although multiple cars are going to research and development for further examination. Should be a very interesting week as to what, if anything, NASCAR finds. Not exactly sure what we're going to have. Now, I'm breaking down all this that's happened with the Jimmy Johnson, Noah Gragson Legacy Motor Club thing, because at the exact same moment that all this was happening, NASCAR decided to go overboard with their graphics department. I thought I was just seeing things. I thought I was just getting bored or something. I'm like, am I getting this bored? Or is there this massive, Monty Python sketch here going on the screen with the CGI and the 75th anniversary and all this? And it's like, okay, it was cool, and I love over-the-top stuff, and it was crazy, but I was like, am I the only one that's seeing this? Like, it's kind of what it felt like watching it. But that's going to make plenty of great memes and everything. And then what? They brought Danny McBride in the booth too. It's like, what's going on here? I know that what's happening in the garage isn't the most interesting thing, but damn it, it's part of the race. Can we talk about what's happening in the race at the same time instead of, jangle the keys in front of the crowd and show this crazy graphic and then bring the guy from, I don't know. I'm not a big Danny McBride fan, honestly, either. So seeing him there, I'm like, oh man, like, I know there's a lot of people that love, his work. He's a little too crude for me. I don't want to sound like a prude because I don't mind crude humor. I think it's hilarious. I just, he's not my favorite. He's not my favorite. There's other ones I think have done plenty of crude stuff. I think are more entertaining. But that was just, it was kind of reaching a critical point. And then all of a sudden it just ended. And it was like, oh, by the way, yeah, all these guys fell out because of radiator issues. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess we're back. So that was kind of strange. One of a few interesting broadcast decisions from this weekend that I think deserves certainly a mention here on the show this evening. But looking at the rest of the results here, drivers that had a rough day there. Kyle Larson looked like he had a good car, at least towards the end, but unfortunately his spin there knocked him out of the race there, eliminated with a crash damage, finishing in the 30th spot. Austin Cindric had a pretty bad hit on the backstretch, dropped him back to the 31st spot. But talking about some good runs, let's talk about J.J. Yaley. I believe Starting Park Cars was bringing up the fact that it's the first time since his Joe Gibbs days that he has 3 top 20 finishes. His 11th place run at Talladega, his 20th at the Bristol Dirt Race, and now a 16th place finish, the Coca-Cola 600, which was the site of Yaley's best ever Cup finish in 2007 when he was the runner-up finisher to Casey Mears in another fuel mileage race in that event. Kyle Petty being your 3rd place finisher in that as well. A tremendous night that was as well. But great run for him. And again, mentioned Zane Smith earlier. Kudos to him. And another one here, Kaulig Racing. I know I've been down on them this year. It seems like they've just really been off this season. They've had either issues in inspection or just issues just not being competitive at all with 2 drivers that should be very competitive in AJ Allmendinger and Justin Haley. I thought for sure after the success that both had in Xfinity, but I think this just again speaks to how different those series are and how different these cars handle and how different I'm sure these drivers have to race them. But in this case here, they finished 14th and 15th, which I think for both of them is probably one of the best runs they've had this year. So kudos to the both of them getting a decent finish here at the same time. So another one to look at. We talked a little bit about Ty Gibbs earlier and the great run he had in the Xfinity race. He seemed like he was on his way to another top 10, and we've seen this out of him a few times. Talladega when he was in the top 5 and he ran out of gas at the very end of it. Other races where he's been up there and just caught up in somebody else's mess or just bad luck towards the end of it there. Unfortunately, this is another one where he's back in the order finishing the 26th spot. But I would fully expect that this is going to be, he's going to start picking things up here and these races are going to stop slipping through his fingers here. I think Ty is still a driver that everybody has to watch because I think it's just a matter of time till once he wins that first race, he's going to be very dangerous. I think it's very easy to say that about a lot of drivers, but especially with Ty and how good he was in Xfinity. And once he figured that car out, how good he was, I think it just shows how complex this was here with these cars and, how much more he has to figure out there at the same time. Looking at Corey LaJoie finishing in the 17th spot, good run for him. Coming into the Gateway weekend here. Shame for Brad Keselowski. He looked like he had one of the best cars in the first 100 laps there. But unfortunately, multiple incidents there. Just one too many mistakes, one too many wrecks, and dropped him further back in the lineup there. But again, I think actually salvaging a 19th place finish, that's better than I expected him to run after all the problems he had there too. But I think, again, there's a lot of interesting storylines coming up. It's not just this driver doesn't like this driver anymore. Again, I think Ross Chastain is kind of getting less attention with all this going on with Bubba Wallace and Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott. And I think there's going to be plenty for plenty of surface appeal for Gateway on top of a race that is still very new to the schedule. Of course, only the second year we've had Cup racing there. And it'll be interesting to see what these teams have learned for this very short race that they're running. Still a 300-miler there. And, of course, as I call it, the 1 week until Sears Point, which is going to be very exciting. So getting ready for that coming up here at the same time. But, again, kudos to Ryan Blaney. I don't know if I said enough about how tremendous that was. The discussion, as of course, was brought up in the broadcast here. Being the first driver to get Roger Penske the win in the 600 the same year and same weekend as winning the Indy 500 with Joseph Newgarden, certainly being the winner in that this year. Tremendous there on that. But again, decent broadcast. I get graphics were weird. Andy McBride and Clint Boyer was still, I think, pretty loud. He kind of seemed to just be repeating what the other broadcasters were saying, only just saying it kind of sarcastically and loudly, which I'm not a big fan of. It kind of makes me wonder why there's 3 people in there at all. But that's here nor there. So I think that's the other part of that. Turning back the clock a little bit further, we'll do a little bit bonus IndyCar discussion here. Our good buddy William Saki, our IndyCar correspondent there and staff writer on the site, I'm sure focuses on this series much more. But the Indy 500 is something definitely always enjoy following 1 year to the next and talking about on this show, and we'll certainly talk about it here. Joseph Newgarden, congratulations to him, another driver that had been waiting a very long time to pull off an accomplishment in his career. Of course, the thing I always think about is that controversial segment that was done with the famous quote-unquote milk gimp video that was done by ABC. I think it was 2012 or 2013. That was very strange. And I actually got to talk to Joseph about this at Sears Point a few years ago. That was my one contact with Joseph, and asking him about it. He's like, hey, you're going to have to talk to ABC about that. I thought it was a Gladiator segment. So it just kind of shows a little bit of light into what's done with these drivers. But again, another driver that has a great sense of humor and a great personality. In fact, I think it kind of harkened back to that video when he had the milk video that was posted earlier this year, him and his wife being involved in it, where they were talking about, buying a cow and how much milk he was drinking and stuff. That was really cool to see. And again, I think there were so many there's always so many great storylines in Indy at both ends of the field. And I think that, this year, of course, was no exception with that at all. You're always going to have people that are just going to be massively excited to win it and just massively disappointed to lose it. And it's always a shame because, you love it if you got multiple people that could win these. But obviously in reality, of course, that's not going to happen. You want the singularity of one guy pulling it off, one guy winning the race. And Joseph got it. And it was under circumstances that, yes, have been certainly controversial. And I think it is, and I was actually thinking about this the other night, it is possible to both enjoy a finish and be happy for an outcome, and also be critical of how we got there, and also, complain about it. I think that doesn't make the complaints any less warranted. I think that there are some real questions about, what's the best way to handle the conclusions of these races. This is not at all a new debate. Of course, the debates after Circuit of the Americas and the Daytona 500 and other races this year in the Cup Series side has certainly brought more focus as to what you do about the closing laps of a race when you have a caution, especially a caution or multiple cautions that are going to threaten to end the race under caution. Should we return to a point where we just bite the bullet and it's like, okay, we can't safely restart this race, we should just finish this race under power under the caution flag, versus doing multiple overtime restarts that could potentially also finish under caution and create potentially a very dangerous situation as well. In this one here, again, I still like the concept of racing to the caution flag. I think that's something that needs to be reevaluated for the closing stages of a race. And I think that would negate the need for multiple restarts, or in the case of the Indy 500, and we've seen this increasingly in the last few years, multiple red flags. I mean, they're very much in that 2002 standpoint that NASCAR was in, which was before the overtime thing. And that was the precursor, as I mentioned in my video, that it was red flags, that it was after a certain point, we're not going to throw the red flag, the race will finish under caution, and so on and so forth. And then, but the issue there, and again, I still do believe this, where the story of these green-white checkers and overtime finishes, where that became controversial, was the decision to freeze the field even at the end of the race, even if you knew that that race to the line was going to be the end, and that was going to most likely be the end of the race under caution. Those have never been reconciled. Now, in the case of this Indy 500 finish, it wouldn't play out perfectly in all of those restarts. Certainly the last one that had the pile up there on the restart on the main straightaway, where you got debris all over the place between that and the finish line. No, do I think that drivers should be hauling through there at 240 miles an hour with the chance of getting your face on the Borg Warner Trophy right there in front of you, but you got to drive through all this shrapnel and two stop cars out there? No. I think that is clearly a situation that you, at the very least, got to throw the caution. As to if it should be the red flag and a one-lap restart, that's a dangerous precedent to set. And I actually got a comment on my Until Lap 11 video from somebody that consulted that and wondering, it's like, okay, well, what, where is a point? Because it's always a creeping challenge. And I know Danica Patrick was right in mentioning that racing is entertainment and that these drivers are entertainers, but they're entertainers that are participating in a particularly dangerous activity, an activity that not only can be dangerous for the competitors, but can be dangerous for the crowd. And we got a very close scare in that as well, which was not really related to their late race restarts, but just to the nature of racing itself and that wheel that went over the catch fence there. That's the part that needs to be looked at. But I think if you have something set up in advance where if a caution flag is going to come out at the end, if there's a wreck at the end of the race and it's within a certain preset number of laps before the end of the race, that if a caution comes out, maybe, I don't know, you have like a different light that goes off or some kind of thing that race control is going to have to decide immediately. Say, okay, yeah, they're safe to go to race to the line, and they're going to have to do it. And it's going to have to be something that's going to have to, I guess, happen over and over to become trained for it. But yeah, clearly, if there's debris between, where the leaders are and the finish line, and certainly stopped cars, yeah, that's not going to be workable. I mean, you see old Indy 500 finishes. What was that? That one that Al Unser won, where there was massive monsoons of rain coming down, and you got cars spinning out all over the place, and one guy tiptoeing their way through. I'm not sure if you're going to really get finishes they're going to allow for that. But racing is all about the run to the finish line, and I think that is the thing that needs to be looked at, and that's what's trying to be replicated through these green-white checker finishes. But do I think there should be overtime in IndyCar? Absolutely not. No, I don't think so. I think the racecraft is so different, and even with the safety advancements that have been brought into the sport, thankfully from lessons learned from accidents like Dan Wheldon's accident and Justin Wilson's, and even from other sports, of course, the halo, would have been helpful, of course, in Formula One and Jules Bianchi's accident. I'm not sure. I don't think that would be appropriate. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about that. And it's not anything new. We heard this in 2013 when Tony Kanaan won the race under caution. And now apparently, in his last start in the Indy 500 before retiring here too. That's another thing to kind of look at the same time. So yeah, I don't think there should be overtime in IndyCar. I think that's a bridge too far. But do I think they need to look into something similar to a not freezing the field and letting people race to the finish line? That should be looked at, but again, I think there should be very clear conditions on there. Again, obviously, if they can't safely reach the finish line, that's going to be a problem, because we've saw in the end of this Indy 500 how aggressive these drivers will be if they have one lap to go out there and get it. And yes, it was an incredible finish. We saw aspects of the track. We saw parts of the track used way more than even in the late stages of any of these races here. And it was incredible, just absolutely incredible. That one-on-one battle there between Marcus Ericsson and Joseph Newgarden was absolutely fantastic. You had these two drivers absolutely chasing each other practically to getting onto pit road. I mean, they just seem to flirt with that more and more, and it's crazy. But damn if it's not entertaining, and it's incredible. And these guys put their lives in their hands, and they do this because they know that they're going for the biggest prize they can get. And Marcus Ericsson doubly so, trying to be the first guy since Castroneves to win it back-to-back years, and not just the financial benefit of that, but also just the historical significance of that and how few people have done it. I don't blame him at all for being as upset as he was. But that's kind of my look at from there. I think the frustration always is, and I kind of sense this a little bit in the Indy 500 towards the end. It's unfortunate that the closing stages of any race these days seems to be just an increasing number of cautions, that we don't have races just play out naturally. Even if it is like a fuel mileage race like today in the Xfinity race and people get strung out and they're multiple seconds apart, it would be nice if you could have a situation where drivers race each other with a little bit more respect and don't just completely lose their heads at the end. But of course, at the final laps of the race, can you really police that? You're going to have drivers out there that are trying to get where the difference between driver getting one spot or another maybe is everything for their team or for their sponsor or for anybody else. And the stakes are still going to be very high. I mean, can you really police that? Probably not. And that's going to be the real challenge there. So I think that's another part to certainly look at going forward. But I think that's the frustration. And I think that's where you get discussions like overtime and racing to the caution and things like that, is the presence of late race cautions. Because the Indy 500 did have that feel like the Daytona 500 this year. Once Suarez had that spin, you just knew it's like, oh man, we are having a really good race. Cautions should be an irritant. They should be an irritant. They shouldn't be something you desire to make a race more interesting. I know this is coming from the guy that was actively wishing for a caution when Jerry Nadeau was trying to win that Atlanta race, but it doesn't have to be, that's different. That's different, damn it. But I think in this case here, that's the other thing to kind of look at there too. You shouldn't always want to have cautions. You should want to have the race played out. If Jerry lost that race that day and Ward Burton cruised the rest of the way, hey, Ward Burton put the best race out there. He deserved to win. It just didn't play out that way. And maybe I don't think that was the first. There were definitely other examples of it that were happening at that time. But the fact that crazy things happening at the end of the race has become the norm, I think is troubling, because you do get a situation where that could get out of hand very quickly. It could be like, a Dan Weldon Las Vegas thing. And I know that in IndyCar, they're very mindful of things that have been very dangerous. And Will Power in particular, who suffered serious injuries in that wreck, has been very outspoken about that. It's unfortunate that, that things like the Fontana race that they had in 2015, was it, that the IndyCar had, that was tremendously competitive and very clean, that was still viewed in a negative sense. It's unfortunate, especially now that we're losing the track there at the same time, because I think that showed really the skill of the drivers. But of course, if the drivers are unhappy about that and worried that it's too dangerous, that could potentially be a problem further down the line too. So, but the Indy 500, tremendous race. I was thoroughly entertained on that. From that, it would have been great if it just played out to the end. If we just had a long battle there and maybe Newgarden working his way through the pack. We saw so many drivers rallying back from things. I mean, Rinus VeeKay from that incident there with Alex Palou and on pit road and coming back to still get in the top 10. Other drivers just kind of clawing their way through there. Santino Ferrucci, I was so impressed with him. And I know that a lot is said and a lot of people don't like Santino, and they always point out all this other stuff that he did earlier in his career. I'm sure if you looked close enough at a lot of drivers' careers, they probably did some stuff that they probably don't want you to hear about, or maybe some things that just didn't work out. I'm not saying everybody, but I honestly don't care. I think the kid's talented. I was happy to see AJ Foyt happy and how well he performed out there. I mean, look, I mean, you don't want to. I'm not saying you have somebody out there that committed some horrendous crime out there, but I mean, but it's. I thought the kid out there was very impressive. I think he gained a lot of fans this month. He had a tremendous month out there. You saw how much it meant to him as well. That he wanted to have the best possible run out there, not just for himself, but for AJ and his family and everything. But that's the thing. Again, there can only be one winner. You only have that one race every year. And much like Stefan Wilson after his injury, leading into this, you just got to look forward. You can't look back. You got to just get ready for the next race. And I'm sure he's looking at it, much like with Stefan. I hope Stefan's doing well as well. Kudos to David Land for getting an interview with him on race morning. It was great to see him discharged from the hospital after that hard crash he had with Catherine Legg in the week leading up to the race there. Again, I think that's another driver that, certainly his family connection, of course, with what happened to his brother that dark day at Pocono. But, again, he was leading at the very end of that race that Will Power won a couple years ago. Yeah, he was on a different strategy and everything. I'm very excited, and I hope he comes back next year better than ever to get a good run out there. We saw so much drama through that, and it was allowed to play out, one way or the other there. Certainly, the frustration, and you just had to feel for Graham Rahal through this. I mean, all that. I mean, his family's team, all of his teammates get in the race. He gets bumped from the field the last minute. He can't get back in there. Everybody's shoving microphones in his face, just waiting for him to break down. And of course he did. I mean, it means so much to his family and everything. And you got the whole world watching, and it's as big for him too. He's trying to win it. And then to get in this ride, never having driven for a Chevy team before, getting out there, and then the car doesn't start. You got a battery issue, and everybody else is driving around you. Just an exhausting month. I'm surprised kudos to him for doing interviews after the race. I think a lot of drivers probably would have just been perfectly happy to just put all that just completely behind them. It's a cruel race, and racing itself is a cruel business. If it were a fair business, there's a lot of drivers that are tremendous personalities and great people, and all of them would have had the chance to win at least some race out there and be able to experience it. But it doesn't. But the wins don't go to drivers that are going to be the most feel-good win, and it's never going to happen. As perfectly as that. And when it does happen so perfectly, that's why it needs to be celebrated for what it is. You think back to Dale Jr. winning at Daytona in 2001. You think back to victories like that. And how perfectly they play out, because that isn't normal. It isn't normal for things to play out that way. And I guess that kind of dovetails with the discussion of green, white checkers too, because it isn't normal that a race finishes under green. Now, it shouldn't finish under caution every time. I know that's the other thing that kind of creates this too. But that's another way to kind of look at it too. So I think for personally, when Tony Kanaan's race finished under caution, I thought it was nice that he got to run that last lap at a slower pace to hear the crowd. I'm sure it was very much the same for Dale Earnhardt when he won the 98 500 and the last lap was under caution, especially for how many problems Earnhardt had on the last lap. If you think of 1990 and Dale Jarrett's pass on him in 1993 and what had happened previous to then. I think that, and I think that becomes more palatable when you have a race to the caution flag. So it kind of cycles all the way back to that. But where it's possible, I don't think you should be willy-nilly there. I think that if it's clear that you're going to have a situation, ordinarily this race would have ended after that restart wreck, and it would have sucked because it's like, come on, guys, you can't just keep this thing together at the end, especially for cars further back in the pack there. But yeah, I mean, it's easy for me to say they're all competing for one of the biggest trophies in the sport, one of the crown jewels in all of auto racing, not just in IndyCar, but all of auto racing. It's you're keyed up and it's all out there. And, that's the kind of thing that happens. But the other aspect of course, I touched on this a little bit too. I'm so thankful that nobody was hurt in that accident when the tire came off of, a Rosenquist's car. Or no, it was the accident with the guy in the pink car. Sorry, I got to look this up. I don't follow the series quite as closely there. Was that Kirkwood? Kirkwood, yeah, Kyle Kirkwood there. The Kirkwood's car losing the wheel. Kirkwood, by the way, had a great run too before that wreck happened, as did Rosenquist. But yeah, scary situation. I mean, my blood froze too when you saw that tire go over the wall. I've had a tire fly over me at Placerville Speedway before under very different circumstances, and it's thankfully the same thing. It came kind of landed in a gap between the stands there, and that was the same thing that happened here. Again, kudos to the track property there for helping the young lady out whose car was damaged in that wreck there. But thankfully, nobody was hurt. I mean, apparently, one person had some minor injuries from debris from the tire that was in the stands there, but they were checked and released, so that's good to hear. I mean, it's and I think that really, again, points to the focus of the dangers of the sport, not just for the drivers, but for the fans as well. You can only make those fences so high. That tire, just a freak situation, and I'm sure from what I'm hearing from the initial reports here, they're looking at this very seriously and trying to figure out the failure modality and try to make the tethers. Apparently the tether itself was fine, but the suspension part involved was, it was just an unusual accident. It sheared in an unpredictable way, and I think that was the reason that it seemed to play out the way it did. But yeah, something that they certainly need to figure out here, and no doubt we're going to be hearing much more about that in the near future too. Tremendous race there, tremendous action. I mean, we had a little bit of everything. The broadcast was great. It elevated everything. The group that they have there, Lee Diffie and everything, they do a tremendous job out there. Catherine Leggs, your last place finisher in that event. The 44 is actually the first last place finishing number with Arthur Greiner back in 1911. So there's a bit of history on that one. But I know William is kind of focusing much more on IndyCar, so he'll be able to give more context on that too. But another thoroughly entertaining 500, and my goodness, counting down the days for next year's as well, especially with Kyle Larson running it next year. That's no doubt going to be interesting. I think that's going to be the real question between now and then is, like, can he outperform what Tony Stewart did in 1999, where he was leading laps of the Indy 500, and what he was third in the Indy 500 and sixth in the 600. I mean, that's tremendous. I think even somebody like Kyle Larson would have a very hard time matching that, or what John Andretti or Robbie Gordon were able to do with theirs. It's gonna be interesting, and it'll be certainly the story to follow along with next year. Hopefully, the weather cooperates next year, and the 600 will still be on the same day, so we can kind of have the enjoyment of somebody traveling from one place to the next. But a lot to be very excited about there for sure at the same time. So going back, and it seems like quite a few days ago now, we'll definitely talk about the Truck Series race here. We'll do some trivia here at the end of the show for those of you night owls here tuning in. I know it's after midnight on the East Coast. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I'll jump into your super chats here as well. We'll have this here for the show tonight. The other emotion that we saw in the Truck Series race, I mean, it was really raw emotions, I think, all the way around, really. Keith McGee, talked about him a little bit, I think, on last week's show. He announced that in June, he was going to move back to Alaska to spend more time with his family. Keith McGee, a driver in the Truck Series, they've been driving the second entry for the Rialm Brothers effort, is a disabled veteran and very outspoken on the subject of post-traumatic stress and what veterans and their families deal with. We've seen some of his posts on social media where he's discussed it very openly. And so certainly the Memorial Day weekend, very significant for him. Running, an American patriotic paint scheme out there along with his teammates and team owner Josh Rialm himself. They were able to run the Ken Block throwback scheme that they were trying to qualify at Darlington, but missed the show. So it's good to see that truck be able to get some laps out there. But unfortunately for Keith McGee, the fuel pump issue, very much the same situation that we saw out of Parker Kligerman tonight in the Xfinity Series race, ended his night. And I'm really curious about what these failure modalities with these fuel pumps and what on earth is going on, because it seems like this has been a problem, especially for a lot of these smaller teams out there, and what's been happening. We've seen it in the Cup Series. BJ McLeod had the same problem at the Cup race at Phoenix with a different unit that was working with a computer chip or however the heck it's set up there. The cable-driven ones here, these trucks and Xfinity efforts seem to have all kinds of problems here, and that was definitely the case here for him. He was very emotional. I retweeted the interview that was done with him there, and kind of thinking back to it. Hopefully, it's only till next time that we see him being able to compete out there in NASCAR and continue this pursuit. But we see how much of a sacrifice it is for these drivers and these teams, and how much time they spend. And a weekend like this, where everything gets switched sideways and the schedule's that much longer, and you're spending extra days, and they got Xfinity guys getting ready as we speak, getting ready for Portland after spending an all-nighter here just to get that Charlotte race in tonight. It's very difficult what these people take on and what they do for our entertainment. And that definitely needs to be respected, whether it's the top team or the ones at the back. But Keith McGee, unfortunately, his second last place finish of the year for him, number 34 effort, and what is ostensibly his last Truck Series start. I know Josh's team is trying to figure things out on their end, because it seemed like his decision to step away kind of surprised them as well, and piecing together the rest of their schedule. But we'll see what's happening there. Another team that's really struggling, G2G Racing. I know I've been writing a lot about them, especially since last year with the Sonoma feature, the Norm Benning feature earlier this year. They have just had a disastrous stretch of races here. The Akinori Ogata fire at North Wilkesboro, both of their trucks with blown engines at the early laps at Darlington, and then they have Armani Williams behind the wheel here at Charlotte. They're coming back from some mechanical issues and just trying to log laps. And then Williams has this scary accident on pit road. Very thankful that nobody was injured. I mean, Williams included there in that incident there. But again, another torn up truck. Now it sounds like they're not going to run Gateway this next week and try to recover here in these next couple of weeks. They're not running Sears Point here in a couple of weeks. Of course, Xfinity is taking over that part of that program for that weekend there. But we're going to find out. G2G's got a lot of equipment. I'm sure they need to kind of reorganize and rebuild and try to regroup really these next couple weeks. And unfortunately, that could be the reality for a lot of teams out there. And, as much as, again, I think that there were a lot of mistakes that were made, certainly, in what happened with Norm Benning's case in particular back at Daytona. I think there was some misunderstandings. I think there's a lot that could be said from that. It's you don't want to see anybody struggle. You don't want to see anybody struggle, whether it's a driver or a team, especially struggle that consistently. That's kind of the situation there too. So them finishing back in the 35th spot. Those are the only two retirees for the Truck Series race. Justin S. Carroll, Haley Deegan, and Chris Wright rounding out your bottom five there. 3 or 4 of those 5 trucks with a bit more damage there, but Justin Carroll with a bit less damage, just finishing back in the order there. The truck race, very impressive. Such a competitive race there. Easily the biggest attaboy has to go to Dean Thompson. I know he didn't win the race, but it was absolutely so exciting to watch him charge through the field there at the end. After we saw him so frustrated at North Wilkesboro after the wreck with Haley Deegan. He's had so much bad luck this year. A lot of it not his own fault. Just getting involved in these accidents in a very fast truck. After going from the Nice Motorsports team to this Tricon Garage effort and trying to make that number 5 truck his own and really get some good runs out there, it was exhilarating to watch him come up there and battling Corey Heim and Carson Hocevar for position. And, they're getting this great battle going. They're second. Ben Rhodes is running away with it, but second place is easily the best race on the track. Just exhilarating to see this come up here. Grant Enfinger catching up there. And Fox couldn't give one less of a care about that. Couldn't care less. And Adam Alexander was part of that. I'm not overlooking that because this is another thing that Adam just lets happen. And I know that this was a production issue, not just a talent issue here. But they kind of went along with it, and that's unfortunate. If they just talked much more about the battle for second, they probably wouldn't have cut away with it. So I'm not willing to absolve them of responsibility in this. But the production staff should be ashamed of themselves for completely screwing that up at the end of that truck race. That was astounding. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. That's been 3 days now, and I'm still upset about it. You got Corey Heim, one of the newer stars here, won a couple races. You got Carson Hocevar, fresh off his first win. just recently. Got Grant Enfinger, one of the series veterans, catching up to the pack here. You have a tremendous battle for second place. It's right there. You just have to point the camera at it and talk about it, and maybe have that be a big screen and maybe a little screen as Rhodes just kind of cruises down and pay lip service to him winning, because he is the winner. You can't just ignore it. But boy, you better show the second place run. You better not show the race winner, show the leader for the last lap and a half or 2 laps solid while all this is happening off screen, and may as well just, not be happening at all, because you can't see it unless you're watching the timing and scoring. Have that happen, especially for Dean Thompson, where this means so much to him. And I'm glad they at least interviewed him, although the interviewers sounded like even they didn't know exactly what was going on or why it was important, which was disappointing. But they show the finish, they show Ben Rhodes cross the line, and then they cut away so you don't even see the second place finisher cross the line. I mean, you can pretty much tell it's going to be Corey Heim, but you don't know that for sure. They couldn't. I mean, it used to be like, even at like a road course where second, like maybe the race winner has already crossed the line, but the race is still finishing. And instead of like showing everybody like celebrating on pit road, you kind of cut back to other cars that are trying to reach the finish line. Maybe there's a really close battle for like 11th place or something. And it's still something, like the race is still happening. Everybody, once the race winner crosses the finish line, the race hasn't ended for everybody else. And everybody else can be spread out for like an entire lap. Where it's practical, and this was certainly a case that they should have done that. I was reminded so much of like the battle that Mike Harmon's team had when Kyle Weatherman was kind of working his way up there and getting Mike Harmon his first top 10, or Ryan Vargas in the TikTok car and Tommy Joe Martins at Texas in 2020 working their way up there, and how that wasn't shown. Now, ultimately at Texas, you did have a really thrilling finish between Harrison Burton and Noah Gragson that really stole the show. But it was happening at the same time with this. There should have been at least a couple screens we were looking at to see these guys really work their way up there, rather than let all this happen off screen and then pick apart the pieces after it's happened. Wouldn't it be much more exciting to show it in the moment, like broadcasting the race? I couldn't believe it. It was, even for how inept Fox has been, especially with their Truck Series coverage, I mean, it really shows that it hasn't, it's not just Vince Welch. It really isn't. And I think that's one thing that should be taken away from this here. And it shows the very clear difference between the talent and the production staff. Although the talent relies on the production staff to an extent, I still believe that, you should have a Ken Squire type out there that could direct the cameras and say, hey, stop showing this. The leaders are in 3 and 4. Point the cameras there. If you need to have that kind of activity there. You need to have that kind of presence of mind to know that this is happening. And that was so disappointing and so frustrating. I can't imagine what Dean Thompson thought going back home, and, as happy as he was with that finish, maybe he wants to rewatch that race and he doesn't even get to see himself cross the line. It's like that's just dumb. That's so dumb, and it's so disrespectful. I mean, for what these teams, these drivers put out there. I mean, I get you can't see absolutely everything, although we're getting pretty close to it with all those onboard cameras on Cup. See, that's the thing. I'm having a harder and harder time coming up with the traditional excuses because a lot of them just don't hold water anymore. You really think about what we have available to, just you and me or anybody else sitting at home looking at timing and scoring. I mean, if we were plugged into, actually producing these races, we could probably point it and say, hey, why don't you show this? Why don't you show that? But that's kind of where we are right now. It's unfortunate. Excuse me. Excuse me, getting me so choked up on this. But yeah, just infuriating, just absolutely infuriating. So hopefully something gets figured out. And honestly, I'm not as scared about this whole thing about like, oh, they're going to bring the Xfinity series to streaming services and they're not going to have them available. It's like, okay, like, you're fine. Like, I mean, I get the issue for people who don't have access to streaming services or would have to pay for a subscription, maybe can't afford it. I get that. That's certainly a big concern. It certainly should be. And, there should be some kind of way to work that out. Now, I don't know what portion of people are on, just have basic cable or the cable networks. It seems like they're putting on more and more specialized cable networks that you'd have to subscribe to anyway, whether it's that or, a streaming service at Hulu or Amazon Fire or whatever else out there. I mean, that would be the thing to have to look at. And I think the NFL has kind of figured this out too, by trying to kind of do the whole thing with Thursday night football and see how much attention there is there. Problem is Thursday night football is an excessive concept in itself. I'm not sure if the numbers would be the same if it were for the Sunday games or anything like that. That could be kind of a factor that plays into that too. But in terms of for the sake of the sport, the potential of maybe bringing in different people, whether it's different broadcasters or different production staff, I hope it doesn't. I hope it's not just a lateral shift and they just take all the same people that are there and move them over here, or just change the graphics on the trucks and that's it. If there's a real chance to kind of change things up a little bit, honestly, I'm all for it. I think maybe a new network would come in. Maybe it wouldn't be a thing where they just pick up a lot of the same people. We saw that from Fox and NBC to an extent, but there was a new attitude there. And you watch some of that old Fox and NBC coverage and just see how different it is versus nowadays. And they were excited. They were excited to bring this about. Is that the same product that we have now? That could be argued one way or the other, but maybe they see that potential there. Maybe they can kind of bring some of that back. But again, I don't want people to lose access to watching the races because it's already difficult enough. And I think there's already been a lot where they don't put them on main broadcast channels, where people don't have access to FS1, or in the case of today, FS2. We didn't have access to FS2 until recently, so I get that too. That's messed up. So hopefully there's something that gets figured out. I think everything seems to be trending towards a streaming direction, which has its positives and negatives for sure. I mean, if you turn everything into YouTube and all that, or you turn everything into Hulu or, again, Amazon or whatever, nothing's permanent anymore. I mean, I'm a big fan of physical media. I like to tape things when I can, or record things on a DVD, or have at least a digital copy of it. But we're getting so many degrees of separation there that stuff is just removed from archives. Or you record something on your DVR, and then maybe it doesn't record it right or something like that. I don't like that direction. I don't like the lack of permanence of things anymore. But I also know that things are going that direction. But it's going to be a matter of how that's going to be handled, and I don't know how delicately that's going to be, because I remember how much of a mess it was when they got rid of watching TV on antennas, like in 2008, 2009. Used to be you could sit outside a baseball game, get one of those little pocket TVs and just watch it on a screen there. It's hard to think of that as being an antiquated thing. Obviously nowadays everybody has their phones and they can watch anything on their phones, and it's not, you don't have to worry about reception and everything, and maybe that's an improvement there too. But not everybody has access to that. It's not the same thing. It was much more of a more inclusive, I guess, means of access to things. Now it's almost a more exclusive form of it, which is kind of a problem. So I don't know. I don't know what the proper solution to that is, but I guess that's a discussion for another day there too. But just so disappointed. Just disappointed that Truck Series race, especially for how good of a race it was, that they're begging for cautions at the end. It's like, oh yeah, this race needs a caution. It'll be better. Again, cautions should be irritants. I need to make a shirt out of that. You should be irritated when a caution comes out. It's like what you want to see is racing. You want to see people going full speed. You want to see fast, loud cars. You want to see people passing each other. You want to see people hanging on, trying to run on old tires or stretch fuel or anything. You should not want, a caution should be like one of the last things you want to see. Like, okay, I mean, a restart. If you like restarts, as I said the other day, it's not the National Association of Stock Car Auto Restarts. If you like restarts, watch drag racing. It's nothing but restarts. It's nothing but just, who's going to start quicker. Okay. And drag racing's cool in its own right. But stock car racing isn't drag racing. It shouldn't be just like who could get off the line quickest and just how many times we're going to do that. It should be, settling into a rhythm. It should be maybe the field gets strung out. Maybe some people lose laps. Maybe some people are so exhausted from running this many laps under green Again, like we talked about this with Wilkesboro last week, where the human element becomes critical as the mechanical element. Can the car hold up? Can the drivers hold up? And how well can they perform? That should be the element of it. And that's kind of what's important in really all of racing, not just stock car racing. I think stock car racing is one of the best ways to show it because the cars can take more punishment. That the human element is allowed to express itself through some contact and being able to kind of bump and bang and have more close quarters racing and so forth. But again, I think that's the other part that needs to be focused upon there. So that's kind of my discussion for the main races here. I see I got a couple super chats here. Thank you so much on those for sure. Let me jump into those here at the same time, and we'll do some trivia here at the end. Actually, while I'm doing this, let me go ahead and we'll do the categories here. You guys can pick which category you'd like. We're not going to do the poll like last week. I think that's got too many. It doesn't have enough options here for this. But we'll do the same thing. So NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card of the categories. NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Those are the categories. So go ahead and vote in here, and we'll talk about. We'll do some of that here in the meantime. While we do that, I'll go ahead and get into the super chats. Michael Kelly Gilliam, thank you first of all for your super chat here. I think it takes a lot off John Hassler. He never won with Blaney, but others did. Perhaps John's first win as crew chief. Very good point. The crew chief storylines I don't follow quite as closely. Sometimes I have to kind of remind myself who's crewing with who, especially at Penske where they kind of change the lineup so much with Todd Gordon and so forth out there. But yeah, I think you're right. Definitely for a race like this where strategy is such a key component. It's not just having a good car. And especially in a race like this, too, where you didn't have practice, you didn't have qualifying, you had to just get in the car and get the best run you could, which is really tricky because you're going to have a situation where you can have people lose laps very early, even if they have competitive cars or would have turned out to be a competitive car. No doubt Legacy Motor Club would have loved having practice because they ended up just in a world of hurt during this race. But yeah, I think it's redeeming for him tremendously. I think this is a race, you don't back into a win in the 600, generally. Even Casey Mears, who won it on fuel mileage, he had to get himself in position to be anywhere near those leaders. I mean, we saw that from the Xfinity race tonight, too. Nobody was going to win the race from 30th place on fuel mileage. It wasn't going to happen. You had to kind of be up there at one point or another. Maybe just be a little bit off on the strategy or just doing something different than everybody else. And the longest race of the year, with the stakes that are out there and with the competition as tough as it is, where you have so many cars that are able to complete 600 miles handily. Yeah, I think that's tremendous. I think it's a huge feather in his cap. And it's a crown jewel race, too. I don't care that, if Austin Dillon wins it, that says something great about Austin Dillon and his crew. Very much the same thing. Jeff Gordon's first win here. They always talk about that 2-tire change that allowed him to beat Rusty Wallace that night. Yeah, there's some famous calls that have made or broken a great run at the Coke 600, and that's another one to look at too. So yeah, great effort for them for sure. Confirmation 07, thank you for your super chat as well. I'm sure you're happy, and I definitely get your comment here for sure. Most impressive drive that I've ever seen from Bubba at the Cup level. He and Freddie had no help from his pit crew. Yeah. I think it was also mentioned, I think Jenna Fryer mentioned it after the race. Bubba just willed that car up there. I was very impressed. It seemed like they had a very challenging race out there. We saw the tempers kind of come up there with the Almirola situation. But Almirola, it must be said, he got in a wreck there that dropped him back in the pack, and Bubba just kept cruising on and has continued this strong stretch. That runner-up finish at Wilkesboro, I was very impressed with him there. And again, and so I don't, I think, it's, I don't want to confuse any of the, the discussion about, the interview with the middle finger and all that stuff. Is that, does that take anything away, from his driving? No, of course not. I mean, he's had a tremendous year. I think the thing that really broke through for him was that Kansas win last fall. to win in a mile-and-a-half track, to win a long, full distance race. I'm sure he was plenty thrilled winning Talladega, but to win on a very challenging track. I mean, Kansas has had some very competitive races, but to sweep the season for the 45 team out there and have that good run. And then, this year, I mean, everybody's had things and obstacles to go through and everything, and he certainly had his share. But him coming out this year and being as strong as he's been, and how good that team in general, I mean, him and Reddick right up there in the top 5 is fantastic. Just like we saw out of them at the All-Star race last week. They're doing great. I think Reddick was fading a bit more in Wilkesboro, but he was up there for parts of it. But in this one here, putting the full race together and really just kind of willing your car up there, that deserves a tremendous amount of respect. And yeah, absolutely agree, confirmation. It was a great run for him, the latest in a series of great runs. Hopefully he'll be able to keep that going here. Gateway's tricky. We got Sears Point coming up. I don't know if you're coming out again for Sears Point. Hopefully you are, because I think maybe he'll have a better showing out there. We'll see. He seems like he's been improving on his road course performance there, where that was something he really didn't like when he was driving at Petty Enterprises in the earlier part of his career. So we'll see what happens. I think that'll be another thing to look at. Nicholas Gray, thank you for your super chat as well. That move Chase made was very uncharacteristic. Fair to say to an extent. Chase certainly had his scuffles with Hamlin before. Certainly the incident in Phoenix in 2017 comes to mind, although that didn't come from nowhere. Of course, Hamlin's incident with Chase at Martinsville the previous week was certainly relevant in that discussion there too. But yeah, would I say that Chase was the kind of person that would right rear somebody and take him out? No, I think that would be very uncharacteristic. Just as I thought it was kind of uncharacteristic for Almirola to be getting in a straight up fight there with Bubba there. I thought that was very unusual. Very strange. Which is why, again, I think the Keselowski element, and I'm glad that Fox was bringing this up more. I think that's where the Keselowski aspect of that wreck probably needs to be looked at a bit more. And maybe it was something there. I'll be curious what Denny says. Maybe if cooler heads prevail here in his live stream. Although I'm sure he's going to still be plenty keyed up when he and the photo guy are going to be doing the stream. They're probably doing it right now, for all I know. And I'm sure he's going to be venting more about the Chase Elliott thing. So we'll see. Also going to be interested to see what kind of reception Hamlin gets over at Gateway, if it's going to be different, if the boos are any louder or whatever. But I will say, Chase Elliott, he's the kind of person who kind of force. I mean, what he did at Phoenix was very different. He didn't right rear Hamlin. He kind of forced him into a situation where, like Hamlin did with Chastain at Pocono last year, said, look, you're going to have to either back off or you're going to wreck. Same thing at Gateway, too. Or at Gateway Phoenix this year with Hamlin and Ross Chastain. He kind of put him in a situation where if Hamlin backed off, it wasn't going to be a problem. But he didn't back off, and he got in the wall and ultimately cut down a tire that ruined his championship bid there, too. So that was kind of another part to look at. So we'll see. So where are we with the super chats on there? Oh, bringing back the over-the-air stuff, Willie? That's news to me. Watch today's race over the air? Well, that'd be fantastic. That's news to me. I've never heard of that. But that's tremendous if they bring something like that back. Well, if that's the case, that should be taken into consideration as to whether, where these sports are broadcast from. It'd be great if they were all on broadcast, because I had rabbit ears on my TV in 2001, and the ones on cable I just couldn't see. It, and the fall race at Charlotte, the fall race at Martinsville, there were a couple weeks, there were just some really huge, great races, but they got preempted, and that was just the end of it. So, yeah. Let's see here. Teams weekend. See if a few for team. Teams one? Okay, we'll do teams then. We'll do a couple teams question to wrap up for this evening. Alrighty, first question for teams. What owner had a chain of car dealerships when he got into racing in 1984? What owner had a chain of car dealerships when he got into racing in 1984? First question there. A little bit of an icebreaker. I'm going to kind of check out the chat here in the meantime, see if I was completely off base with some of the stuff I was talking about here. But yeah. Oh, I said Milk Gimp. Yeah, that was RD Fox. I probably shouldn't even broached it, but I couldn't think of anything else to call that ad. But yeah, Milk one. I mean, you know what it is. I mean, I don't know what. I feel like I can't call it anything else because it's going to be even more. Well, perhaps not age appropriate for everybody that's in this chat here that that it already is. It's already a problem. But that's the first thing I could think of. Bring back Mr. Excitement, Jimmy Spencer. That would be fun too. That would be good too. Schrader for segment 1, Mikey for 2, and Johnny Benson for segment 3. RD Fox. Yeah, that could be fun. Let's see here. Alrighty, what owner had a chain of car dealerships when he got into racing in 1984? And of course, you guys got it. The answer is Rick Hendrick. Of course, Rick Hendrick. Yeah, Blaney's paint scheme was awesome. Makes me want to try that cherry. Anybody tried that cherry lime flavor of the Body Armor drink yet? I haven't seen it yet around here, so I'm gonna have to give that a try. I usually do like it. I've had it on here on the show before. I do like the Mamba one, the grape strawberry one, but there's other ones that are good too. The fruit punch is good too. All right. Let's see here. Next question is, what driver did Bill Davis hire to replace Mark Martin in the Busch Series? What driver did Bill Davis hire to replace Mark Martin in the Busch Series? Yeah, I haven't seen it either. I gotta look. I haven't really looked that hard. I did get some of the Dr. Pepper, the strawberries and cream that Bubba ran in the scheme there, because that sounds good. I haven't tried that yet, but I do have it. I thought about bringing it out on the show here, but I'm still nursing this code red, and the show's already 10 o'clock Pacific time here, and I got work tomorrow morning, so probably shouldn't have that much caffeine this time of night. So that's kind of where I am right now. What driver did Bill Davis hire to replace Mark Martin in the Busch Series? Yeah, NASCAR has got to suspend Chase Elliott. What he did was unjustified. It isn't kind. This is Marcos Lewis. I mean, if it were exactly what happened with Bubba Wallace there, and again, I said this when the Bubba Wallace thing happened. If it was Denny Hamlin that did that, and that if it was Chase Elliott, that for whatever reason, had a problem with Kyle Larson, deliberately left reared him in that car and then confronted him in a fight and did that, yeah, I would expect they would suspend him too. I would. It's not just a Bubba Wallace thing. It absolutely isn't. I think in that particular case, it was much more a car situation because I think NASCAR was hoping and praying that they didn't have a serious accident with that car, knowing about all those concussions and knowing there was not a damn thing they could do about it until the end of that season. I think that was going to be a big situation there. But with this one here, the Keselowski element makes it a little unclear. If it is as it turns out, and Keselowski had nothing to do with it, and Chase Elliott veered into Hamlin, and the telemetry seems to indicate that. That's pretty convincing. That's definitely, it helps to have something to point at from Hamlin's case rather than just a wrecked race car. He probably should be suspended. He should, and it should be for the sake of consistency. And I think that would be helpful because I think that would show people that it's not a Bubba Wallace thing. It's not, they're not trying to get one driver or another, or they're not treating people differently in that sense. If you're willing to suspend the most popular driver for that, yeah, that's crazy. And I don't think there's a dissonance between that and, drivers expressing themselves. You certainly don't want people right-rearing people and hooking them in the wall at one of the fastest parts of the track. You don't want that. So if it was intentional, and it turned out that it was, yeah, then NASCAR probably should do something about it. And yeah, that should be done consistently. Because I think consistency is something that NASCAR's always been struggling with. And it sent the wrong message in more cases than I can count. But my issue with it is I'm not entirely convinced it was intentional. And it's not just based on Chase's words, because of course he's not going to say that it was intentional, because they know, they all know. They all know they can't say it's intentional, because they're going to get the same treatment Denny Hamlin had after Phoenix, which isn't right, and that needs to be reevaluated too. But if it was, and again, maybe if going to the telemetry is probably the way to do it, then yeah, they should for the sake of consistency suspend him. And ultimately for Chase Elliott, this shouldn't matter, but ultimately in this case, what does it matter if they suspend him for a week, because he's already got the medical waiver from the stuff earlier this year, and he probably wins the race and makes the playoffs anyway. So I think that's kind of the other part to look at. What driver did Bill Davis hire to replace Mark Martin in the Busch Series? All right, everybody got it. The answer is indeed Jeff Gordon. Jeff Gordon's easy answer. Jeff Gordon, you guys got it. Coconut pineapple is like sunblock. Uncle Dad, yeah. I don't know. That doesn't sound that appetizing, I gotta say. Alrighty. Here we go. Next question. What driver got a ride from co-owners Dick Brooks and Felix Sabates in 1994? What driver got a ride from co-owners Dick Brooks and Felix Sabates in 1994? Brad didn't touch him. You could see from the view from above. I got to see that replay. I keep looking at the one that's front on or the side view. It looked like it was close. But yeah, if he didn't touch him, then okay, yeah, you got to go to the telemetry and you got to go with the visuals. And if I don't think if the right front suspension was damaged, the car would, Elliott's car would have pulled to the right. It wouldn't have pulled to the left into, Hamlin's right rear. So yeah, I think at that point, Elliott doesn't have a leg to stand on, and that should be the outcome. So yeah, we'll see. It's going to be an interesting week one way or the other. And I'm sure, NASCAR is going to, I don't know what they're going to do. They've taken a ton of cars into R&D. You got a couple of fights. You got a track that had the Ross Chastain thing last year. Do they just let things play out, or do they step in? I don't know. At this point, it seems like we're so far off script, I don't even know. What driver got a ride from co-owners Dick Brooks and Felix Sabates in 1994? We got guesses for Kyle Petty and Rich Bickle, Elton Sawyer. All right, just give it a thought there. Blaney is second in points now. Yeah, there you go. Hadn't even thought of that. Let's see. It's weird not seeing a Blaney finish last. Well, they're up 700. Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, that's a whole different thing there. We saw just Dave Blaney's one of. I guess. Well, I can't really take credit for it because it didn't happen on the same week. But it's good that we got to see the best of Dave Blaney at the Atlanta race. One of the best runs he had in the 500 Days episode. And then see Ryan Blaney break through not long after, but not the same week, but similar. What driver got a ride from co-owners Dick Brooks and Felix Sabates 94? The answer is Bobby Hamilton. Tanner Lavaseur, you got that one. Bobby Hamilton is the correct answer. So we're thinking of the number 40 car, so not the 42. A lot of you guessed Kyle Petty. You're thinking of the 42 car. That he was certainly the teammate, but that was a different one there too. Willie B, did I watch Monaco? I did not, and I regret not doing that. I was very upset last year at Monaco. It seemed like the atmosphere around the race, everybody's like, oh, why is it even on here? And it's like, this race is terrible. And then they did that whole thing where it was raining, and then everybody was wringing their hands about like, oh, well, we can't go out there. We can't go out there with rain tires. Oh, who knows what'll happen? It's like, yeah, it'll probably be a great race, and it's going to be like what we had with oh gosh, I know even less about Formula One than IndyCar, but like that one driver that won the race where like almost everybody else wrecked and it was crazy. Like, it's like, oh, we can't have that. And I was like, I just didn't want to go through that this year. I said, you know what? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sleep. I want to be fresh for the Indy 500. I'm going to sleep in. I'm not going to watch it. And I hate that I didn't see it because I got up and we're getting ready for the Indy 500. And Lastbro tells me, oh my God, you should have seen the Formula One race. It started raining at the end and they go to rain tires. And there were teams that didn't want to do rain tires. And then they were getting black flagged. And it's like, oh, it just sounded like it was like a lot of fun. And it was kind of a mess. So I regret not seeing it, but no, I did not see it. I heard who won. I heard that the last place battle was wide open, that it was almost the first Monaco race with nobody falling out of it. I didn't have anything planned to write an article for it, but yeah, I was so sick of it from last year. I was just upset at it. I was like, you know what? I could either watch that and just raise my blood pressure, or I could sleep in and just be fresh for the Indy 500. And I decided to do the other one, and that probably wasn't the best choice. I usually do watch Monaco. I usually do. I like the spectacle of it. And it would have worked out fine this time because the 600 got postponed anyway, and I probably would have just gone to sleep early that night. But yeah, no, I did not watch it though. I did not watch it, so I can't really comment on it. Sorry, I'm not a big Formula One guy, but I hope that if they're re-examining their tire policies and their rain policies, or they're loosening things up a little bit. Maybe I'll re-examine that, but I don't know. Maybe I fell into too much of the negative hype about the race there, but that one last year really left a bad taste in my mouth, and I was bored to tears last year. Just didn't feel like it. So I know I'm not gaining a lot of Formula One fans here on the live stream with that, but I'm sure there's plenty of Formula One streams that will be like, oh my gosh, it was the greatest one ever. Oh, okay. It's like, all right, sure. Let's see here. All right, we're just going to do a couple more questions. It's really late here on this one. We're about 10:15 here at Last Car Headquarters, much later for you guys on the East Coast. I appreciate you guys staying tuned here. And we'll wrap up the show here in just a little bit. So we'll do that. Alrighty. So here we go. Next question here. What owner started the 90s with Morgan Shepherd and Jeff Bodine driving Fords? What owner started the 90s with Morgan Shepherd and Jeff Bodine driving Fords? The Indy 500 was fantastic. I just loved it. I'm glad I was more awake for it. I'd rather not, because the problem is with Monaco, I could get up at like, I don't know, 5 or 6 in the morning Pacific time here to watch it, and then it's just going to be groggy until the Indy 500 and probably fall asleep during the pre-race stuff, and then just be just a zombie for the 600. And I was like, well, let's be fresher for it, but I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what I do next year. That'll be for next year on that. What owner started the 90s with Morgan Shepherd and Jeff Bodine driving Fords is the next question. It was a little better this year, but yeah, it took Indy 3 laps to have more lead changes than Monaco. Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, it's not all about the lead changes. I mean, as I said, if there's good racing through the pack, I mean, the one thing with Formula One is you could tell how long it's been that way, where a team dominates for so many years that, they've had to be resourceful and talk about things happening further back in the pack. And they've had to show what's happening with other cars and talk about them. And this is in short races. I mean, they're really 90-minute races in general, much shorter than, average races we see in IndyCar or in NASCAR. But, in the broadcasting method has evolved in such a way to really address what's happening in these other cars. I got to say, one thing I really enjoyed with Formula One this week, and one reason I almost decided to watch it, I'm trying to remember what the name of the guy's channel was, but he went to the cheapest Formula One race he could and ended up flying from New York to Bahrain. And it was a fascinating videography. He did a tremendous job. I want to give a shout out to him on it. Let me pull up the video just so I can make sure I give him the right thing on here. It's one of a couple of... I haven't shown Lastbro it yet, but I should, because I thought it was interesting. It's in my favorites list. It should be. I thought I bookmarked it. Doot. Where's my favorites list? Where is it? There we go. It was Downey Live, Downie Live. I flew to the cheapest Formula One race. Really enjoyed that one. Really enjoyed it. I mean, heck, that looked like a lot of fun. And I watched that on Saturday night, and I was thinking about staying up after that point. I was like, well, okay, he made that look like a lot of fun. It looked like he had a great time, and I'm like, okay, but nah, I didn't. What owner started the '90s with Morgan Shepherd and Jeff Bodine driving Fords? The answer is indeed Bud Moore. A lot of you got that one. Bud Moore is indeed the correct answer. Another channel I like, and I want to kind of give them a mention. I haven't watched their latest video. Is the Mobile Chicane. That's a really... He does like these... I mean, it's almost like a podcast, really. And again, that's more Formula One history. But he does such a good job. Great detail. He kind of does that thing where, you kind of have a little fun with it. You kind of do like little quips and stuff like that in there. I don't really do that in my videos. Maybe I should, because it seems like that format is much more popular. But he does it. I usually shy away from it because I don't like it when people go way too far with it. Like, I didn't grow up watching SpongeBob, and everybody always does all these SpongeBob references in their videos, and it's just like, no, I'm not going to do that. But this guy's videos, the Mobile Chicane, he does Formula One content. He does like these long form videos on Formula One history, and he does a great job. I usually listen to his podcast at work, and they're great. I think he does his newest one's on Bruno Senna, and I haven't listened to that one yet, and I certainly intend to. But he's done things on like teams that struggled, or other elements of the history, kind of the more humorous side of the sport. And he's very good. He's very good. I really enjoyed that. So that was a good video. A good channel there too. So a couple recommendations there if you haven't seen those yet. Let's see. So we'll do one more. We'll do one more question here for tonight. Let's see here. All right, got one more question here coming up. I want to give a mention here because I mentioned this on in the Patreon here before we get to the last question here. So more videos are in the works. Again, big thanks to those of you guys for supporting 500 Days and kind of spreading the word on that. Those videos are doing well. I'm glad people are sharing those stories. I've reposted the 8-hour video on parts 1 through 4. There was an echo effect at the end of that video that was not intentional, and I certainly don't want the last 10 seconds of my 8-hour video to sound terrible, so that's why that video was re-uploaded there. I also wanted to kind of give another shot at kind of balancing the audio a little bit more. So that version that's up there now will be the version of record, so that one's still up there. You guys can check that out. What I'm planning for my next videos, as I mentioned in the Patreon here, next video I'm working on is a biography of Trevor Boyes that I was working on before I started to kind of work on the 500 Days episodes. The script on that one is pretty much ready to go. I'm also working on getting the transcript edited from Larry Gunselman's interview for another Field Fillers episode. In between those two videos, I want to do another episode of 500 Days, which will be the Darlington episode. And then after the Field Fillers one, I want to do a 500 Days on Bristol. So basically what I'd like to do over the long term is space 500 Days episodes between standalone videos or Field Fillers episodes. And I have ideas for both that I think are coming together. I have some other ones that I'd like to write out that I'm working on, but I'm trying to not get too far. I'm trying not to overdrive my headlights here. I'm trying to kind of finish what I have, get the Boys script recorded. The Boys script is I finished editing it this weekend. I think it's ready to go. I need to get the Gunselman script written, so it's ready to record. And I got the research started on the Darlington episode. So all three of those are in kind of various phases of being completed. And then Bristol for 500 Days will come together after the Darlington one's done. So that's kind of what we're working on here in the meantime. And that's that. Hopefully that'll answer some questions about what I'm doing with other series. I'm not planning on just doing just 500 Days or just Field Fillers or just standalone videos. My goal was, especially this year, since I'm doing less trackside stuff, is I wanted to be able to do more, just do all of them and kind of try to kind of go back and forth between them to keep them all fresh so it doesn't get stale from one to the next. And then the net effect of that is I think the 2001, the 500 days has nice internal momentum to it that I think that'll encourage me to kind of produce more regular content, whether it is, 500 days or standalone content. So that's still coming up here. So stay tuned on this. Patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock for advanced access to the videos there. And of course, more updates on it at LastCarOnBrock on my Twitter feed. Of course, here on this channel. So we'll have some more of that coming up here at the same time. So, last question for this evening, folks. What team owner gave Ernie Irvan his first NASCAR Winston Cup ride in 1987? What team owner gave Ernie Irvan his first NASCAR Winston Cup ride in 1987? That is a question. Yeah, Matt Parsons, I'm with you. I haven't even looked at Formula One prices. That's not even something I've even thought about doing, the thing. I haven't really thought about doing. I've done the Formula Last One statistics, and I tried to make that a spin-off site, and it got zero interest. I literally put it online, even hyperlinked it to the Last Car page during the season. Zero hits. None. Nothing. This was in 2012 that I compiled a lot of those stats. That's why there's the ebook up there now that basically just has just the stats in it, is because that's all I could do with them. Is just try to turn it into something that could be updated from one year to the next. So that's kind of where that got left off. But yeah, we'll see. What team owner gave Ernie Irvan his first Winston Cup ride in 1987? All right, we got guesses for J.D. Stacy, D.K. Ulrich, Judy Donlavey. Yeah, someone finds NASCAR races expensive. F1 races aren't even a possibility. Yeah, I'm with you, Edison. Yeah. Well, some NASCAR races, they're getting really crazy. That Chicago race, I don't know how many people are going to pay the asking fee for those tickets. So we'll see. What team owner gave Ernie Irvan his first NASCAR Winston Cup ride in 1987? Is it a trick question because Dale Sr. sponsored the car as a sole entry? Think about it. What team owner gave Ernie Irvan his first NASCAR Winston Cup ride in 1987? Alrighty, and here we go. Here comes the answer. What team owner gave Irvan his first ride? It was Mark Reno. Mark Reno, he of Phoenix Racing. Mark Reno is the correct answer. I believe it was the number 56 car, and it was sponsored by Earnhardt. You're very, very perceptive to bring that up, Willie B. So good call on that one. But yes, the answer is Mark Reno on that. I don't think anybody got that. McClure's attempting one. Of course, that was where he had most of his early success. And nope, not DK Ulrich, Mark Reno. Very similar. Ulrich ran the 6, and Irvan drove for them too. But yeah, Mark Reno is the correct answer on that one too. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in for our late night show here. I really do appreciate it. I hope you had a tremendous weekend, a tremendous Memorial Day weekend here. Hope it was restful and enjoyable. For those of you here in the States, certainly gains appreciation for the freedoms that we are able to all enjoy shows like doing things like this and have fun little frivolous moments like this in the meantime here. Certainly keeping all of that in mind, and I hope you had a wonderful weekend with your families wherever you are, and enjoyed the action here for the racing. Patreon, you in the Patreon already know what some of those plans already are. If you haven't checked that out, again, patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock for more information on that. So we got some exciting stuff coming up here, and stay tuned for that. So have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you all next week.